Flashing red and blue lights sliced through the heavy midnight rain, reflecting off the polished hood of a Mercedes-Benz. Inside sat a man who had spent decades sending criminals to prison, completely unaware that tonight he was the one about to be thrown in handcuffs. A routine traffic stop was about to spiral into a viral nightmare of abuse, arrogance, and a shocking twist that would shatter a corrupt police department. Stay tuned, because arrogance can be blinding. The courthouse felt like a tomb by the time Honorable Darius K. Langston finally packed his briefcase. A distinguished black man in his late 50s, silver threading through his close-cropped hair. He carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had clawed his way from a working-class neighborhood to the highest echelons of the state's judicial system. Tonight, his bones ached with the deep exhaustion that comes from presiding over a grueling homicide trial. He locked his chambers, the heavy oak door clicking shut with finality that echoed down the marble halls. Tucked under his arm inside a black waterproof garment bag was his judicial robe, his armor, the symbol of the heavy responsibility he carried. He was taking it home to be professionally dry cleaned for the upcoming swearing-in ceremony of new attorneys. Outside, the sky had opened up, dumping a relentless sheet of freezing rain onto the city streets. Darius hurried to his reserved spot and slipped into the heated leather sanctuary of his dark blue Mercedes-Benz S-Class. The engine purred to life as rain drummed against the windshield. His commute home to Oak Ridge Estates, a secluded affluent suburb of manicured lawns and heavy private security, was usually his time to decompress. The roads gleamed like black glass under the streetlights. He drove carefully, hands at 10 and 2, classical music playing softly through the surround sound speakers. He was mere minutes from his driveway when the darkness behind him exploded with light. The strobe of red and blue flashed violently in his rearview mirror. A police siren gave a short, aggressive wail, a demand, not a request. Darius's brow furrowed. He glanced at his speedometer, right at the limit. Headlights working. Tags current. A flicker of unease stirred in his chest, that primal instinct no Harvard law degree or seat on the bench could fully erase. He knew the statistics. He knew the streets. Remaining perfectly calm, he activated his right turn signal and slowly pulled onto the shoulder beneath a flickering street lamp. He shifted into park, killed the engine, and rolled down all 4 windows, a standard precaution so officers would feel safe approaching. He placed his large, steady hands firmly on top of the steering wheel, where they were clearly visible. Through the rain-streaked side mirror, he watched the cruiser door open. 2 figures stepped into the downpour. The lead officer walked with a puffed-out chest and a swagger that bordered on theatrical. Officer Mitchell Reynolds, a young man whose aggressive posture suggested a deep need to prove his authority. His hand hovered over his service weapon. Trailing slightly behind on the passenger side was his partner, Officer Corey Bennett, a rookie whose face was tight with nervous energy. Reynolds flashed his heavy maglite directly into Darius's face, the beam searing his retinas. "Good evening, officer," Darius said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone carrying the same authoritative calm he used to silence bickering attorneys in his courtroom. "Is there a problem?" "Keep your hands on the wheel," Reynolds barked, ignoring the greeting. The flashlight beam aggressively swept the luxurious interior, lingering on the wood-grain dashboard and premium leather before settling back on Darius's face. "Whose car is this?" Darius blinked against the harsh light. "This is my vehicle, officer. May I ask why I was pulled over?" Reynolds scoffed, a wet, ugly sound that cut through the rain. "Your vehicle, right? You expect me to believe a guy like you is cruising around Oak Ridge Estates in a $150,000 Benz in the dead of night?" A cold, familiar knot tightened in Darius's stomach. The same prejudiced venom he had fought his entire career, now staring him in the face on a dark road. He knew instantly that revealing his judicial title to a man already looking for a fight would only escalate things. Reynolds wasn't looking for a judge. He was looking for a victim. "I live in this neighborhood," Darius stated clearly. "I am returning home from work. Again, officer, I am legally required to ask, what is your reasonable suspicion for initiating this traffic stop?" The legal terminology hit like a spark on a powder keg. Reynolds leaned closer, rain dripping from the brim of his cap, smelling faintly of stale coffee and overpowering spearmint gum.
"Oh, we got a roadside lawyer here,"
Reynolds sneered, glancing over the roof at his partner.
"Hey, Corey, you hear this guy? Asking about reasonable suspicion."
He turned back, voice dropping to a menacing growl. "I'll tell you what my suspicion is. My suspicion is that this car doesn't belong to you. My suspicion is that you're going to hand me your license, registration, and proof of insurance, or I'm going to drag you out through this window. Understand?" Darius did not flinch. He slowly lifted his right hand, movements deliberate and telegraphed. "My wallet is in my breast pocket, officer. My registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for my wallet now." "Do it slow," Reynolds snapped, hand tightening on his gun. Darius retrieved his wallet, extracted his driver's license, then reached across to pop the glove compartment and handed over the registration, keeping his hands entirely visible. Reynolds snatched the documents and shined his light on them. Darius Langston. The paperwork was flawless, but instead of returning the documents and sending him on his way, Reynolds' jaw set in a stubborn, angry line. The facts did not match the story he had already written in his head.
"Fake ID,"
Reynolds muttered, tapping the plastic card against his knuckles. "Good quality, but I've seen better. Where'd you steal the car, Langston? Or whatever your real name is, officer?" "That is a state-issued driver's license," Darius replied, his tone dropping an octave into the cold, commanding register that usually made seasoned defense attorneys sweat. "The vehicle is registered to me. I have complied with your requests. If you are not writing me a citation for a traffic violation, I am asking if I am free to go."
"You're not going anywhere,"
Reynolds spat. "Step out of the vehicle." "I am politely declining your request to step out of the vehicle, officer, as you have not articulated a lawful reason for detaining me," Darius answered, hands still locked on the steering wheel. He knew the law perfectly. He was testing the waters, documenting every constitutional violation in his mental ledger. He wanted Reynolds to commit fully to his baseless aggression. "It wasn't a request, pal," Reynolds shouted, suddenly yanking the driver's side door open. Freezing rain immediately blew into the pristine interior of the Mercedes. "Step out of the car right now, or I will charge you with resisting arrest." From the passenger side, Officer Bennett shifted uncomfortably. "Mitch, the registration matches the ID. Maybe we should just run it through dispatch before—"
"Shut up, Corey," Reynolds barked. "I know a booster when I see one. He's stalling."
Reynolds turned back to Darius, hand now hovering over his taser. "Last warning, Langston. Out of the car." Darius unbuckled his seatbelt with slow, precise movements. He knew arguing constitutional law on the side of a dark highway with an armed, irrational man was a fool's errand. The courtroom was his battlefield, not the asphalt. He stepped out into the freezing rain, standing to his full height. At 6'2", he towered over Reynolds, a physical reality that only seemed to infuriate the young cop further. "Turn around and put your hands on the roof of the car," Reynolds ordered, shoving Darius roughly by the shoulder. Darius remained stoic, absorbing the physical insult without a word. He placed his hands flat against the cold, wet roof of his own vehicle and spread his legs as Reynolds kicked his ankles apart, aggressively patting down the pockets of his tailored suit.
"Nothing on him,"
Reynolds grunted. He leaned into the open doorway, flashlight sweeping the interior again, until the beam landed on the black garment bag hanging from the dry-cleaning hook. The zipper had slipped down a few inches, revealing the heavy pleated black fabric inside. Reynolds grabbed the bag and yanked it off the hook, tossing it onto the wet leather of the back seat. He ripped the zipper all the way down, exposing the judicial robe. A cruel, mocking laugh erupted from his chest.
Well, well, well. Look what we have here, Corey."
Reynolds pulled the heavy black robe out of the protective bag, holding it up in the rain. The fabric meant to represent impartial justice now dripped with dirty highway water. "What is this?" he sneered, walking over to where Darius stood with his hands on the roof. He shoved the wet fabric into Darius's line of sight. "Is this a choir gown? You singing in the gospel choir on Sundays, stealing cars on Fridays? That is a judicial robe." Darius said, his voice eerily calm despite the inferno of rage building in his chest at seeing his symbol of office disrespected. "Please return it to the protective bag." Reynolds burst into raucous laughter, looking over at his partner. Bennett didn't laugh. He just looked deeply uncomfortable, rain plastering his pale face. "A judicial robe," Reynolds mocked, stepping closer, his breath hot against Darius's neck. "Who are you dressing up as, Grandpa? Judge Judy? Is it Halloween already? Or are you playing a lawyer in some community theater play?" "I'm not playing anything, officer," Darius replied, keeping his eyes fixed on the wet asphalt. "I strongly advise you to run my name through your dispatch system. Look at the occupation listed in the state registry." "I don't need dispatch to tell me what I'm looking at," Reynolds spat, tossing the wet robe onto the muddy shoulder of the road. Darius's jaw tightened so hard, his teeth ached as the fabric hit the dirt. "I'm looking at a liar, a thief, and a guy who thinks he's smarter than the police. Let me guess. You broke into some rich guy's house in Oak Ridge, stole the keys to the Benz, and grabbed this costume to use as a disguise. Or maybe you were going to pawn it." "You're making a grave mistake," Darius said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet whisper. "A mistake that will cost you your badge." That was the trigger. Reynolds' face contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. The idea of this man, this black man he had already categorized as a criminal, threatening his authority was intolerable. "Are you threatening me?" Reynolds screamed, grabbing Darius by the collar of his expensive suit and violently slamming him against the side of the Mercedes. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs. The deeper wound was the utter disregard for his humanity. "Mitch, hey, take it easy!" Bennett yelled, finally stepping forward, hands raised. "He's not fighting back. Just cuff him if we're taking him." "He just threatened an officer of the law," Reynolds roared, pressing his forearm against the back of Darius's neck, pinning his face to the wet glass of the window. "Give me your hands. Stop resisting." "I am not resisting," Darius gasped. His cheek flattened against the glass. He brought his hands behind his back entirely, of his own volition, refusing to give Reynolds the satisfaction of a struggle. He knew any sudden movement would be written up in a falsified report as assaulting an officer. Click, click. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit brutally into his wrists. Reynolds ratcheted them as tight as they could possibly go, cutting off circulation instantly. The indignity was suffocating. Honorable Darius K. Langston, a man who had sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution, a man who regularly had the chief of police sitting in his chambers asking for warrants, was now shackled like a violent felon in the pouring rain, pinned against his own property. "You're under arrest for grand theft auto, possession of stolen property, and resisting arrest," Reynolds hissed in his ear, triumphant. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it because I am sick of hearing your voice." As Reynolds dragged Darius backward toward the cruiser, a pair of headlights approached from the opposite direction and slowed. It was a silver Lexus SUV. Darius recognized it instantly. It belonged to Edward Farnsworth, a retired orthopedic surgeon who lived 3 houses down in Oak Ridge Estates. The SUV rolled to a near stop. Farnsworth peered through the rain-streaked window, eyes locking onto Darius. Darius looked back at his neighbor, rain dripping from his eyelashes, hands bound tightly behind his back. He expected Farnsworth to roll down the window and yell, "Hey, what are you doing? That's Judge Langston." Instead, Farnsworth's eyes widened in shock. Then a look of nervous apprehension washed over his face. He quickly looked away, hit the gas, and sped past, taillights disappearing into the stormy night. The betrayal stung, but it only crystallized Darius's resolve. The world saw what it wanted to see. Reynolds saw a criminal. Farnsworth saw a liability. Neither saw the man.
"Keep moving,"
Reynolds barked, shoving Darius roughly toward the back of the squad car. Bennett opened the rear door, unable to meet Darius's eyes. Reynolds grabbed the top of his head and practically threw him into the cramped, hard plastic back seat. The door slammed shut with a heavy metallic thud, sealing him in claustrophobic darkness that smelled of vomit and industrial cleaner. Outside, Darius could hear the muffled voices through the rain. "Mitch, are you sure about this?" Bennett was saying, voice laced with panic. "The car isn't reported stolen. The plates come back to him. We have no actual probable cause, and the guy isn't acting like a booster. What if that ID is real?"
"Grow a spine, Corey,"
Reynolds snapped back. "I've been on the force several years longer than you. I know how these guys operate. They get their hands on a nice suit and a fancy car, and they think they're untouchable. He probably printed that ID in his basement. And what about that weird black costume? Who carries that around? It's probably stolen property, too. We'll get him to the precinct, put him in the box, and he'll confess. They always do."
"What about his car?"
Bennett asked. "Call for a tow. Have it impounded. Toss that stupid dress in the trunk for evidence." Darius sat in the pitch-black back seat, wrists throbbing, wetsuit clinging to his skin, shivering violently from the cold. He leaned his head back against the thick plexiglass partition. A normal man would be screaming. A normal man would be crying, begging them to check his credentials, shouting his title until his throat bled. But Darius was a master chess player, and Officer Reynolds had just aggressively moved his pawns without looking at the board. Darius knew the dashcam was rolling. He knew the microphones on the officers' uniforms were recording every word, every threat, every racial assumption masked as police intuition. He also knew the moment he revealed his identity as a superior court judge, the blue wall of silence would descend. Reynolds would immediately apologize, claim it was a terrible misunderstanding, uncuff him, and beg for forgiveness. The department brass would sweep it under the rug, offering a private apology while leaving Reynolds on the streets to terrorize someone without the power to destroy him. Darius wasn't going to let that happen. He wasn't going to let Reynolds realize his mistake in the dark where it could be hidden. He was going to let him carry this charade all the way into the blinding fluorescent lights of the precinct. He was going to let Reynolds write his falsified report. He was going to let him stand before the booking sergeant and double down on his lies. Only when the trap was completely sprung, only when there was absolutely no way for the department to hide the rot in their ranks, would Honorable Darius K. Langston finally introduce himself. The front doors of the cruiser opened and both officers slid into the front seats, bringing the smell of wet wool and adrenaline with them. Reynolds adjusted the rearview mirror, locking eyes with Darius in the reflection. "Comfortable back there, fake ID?" Reynolds sneered, throwing the cruiser into drive. Darius Langston looked directly into the mirror, his face a mask of terrifying, unbreakable calm. "I am exactly where I need to be, Officer Reynolds," he replied softly. Drive. The 12th precinct of the Oak Ridge Police Department was a stark contrast to the affluent neighborhood it bordered. Inside it was a sensory assault of harsh fluorescent lighting, peeling linoleum floors, and the deeply ingrained odor of industrial bleach, stale sweat, and burnt coffee. It was a place designed to break spirits, to make people sitting on the hard wooden benches feel small and powerless. Officer Mitchell Reynolds practically kicked the heavy double doors open, marching Darius Langston into the chaotic bullpen by the chain of his handcuffs. Darius's tailored suit was thoroughly soaked, sticking to his frame, and his wrists were bruised a deep, angry purple. Yet he walked with a perfectly straight spine, chin held high. He did not look like a man who had just been arrested. He looked like a man inspecting a severely mismanaged facility. "Keep walking, Booster," Reynolds muttered, shoving him toward the booking desk. Behind the elevated desk sat Sergeant William Brody, a 20-year veteran of the force, a large, balding man with heavy bags under his eyes, who looked like he had seen every variety of human stupidity at least twice. He barely looked up from his computer screen as Reynolds approached, dragging Darius like a hunting trophy. "What do we have tonight, Mitch?" Brody asked, voice a rumbling monotone.
"Got a live one, Sarge,"
Reynolds boasted, leaning against the tall desk, chest puffed out. "Grand theft auto, possession of stolen property, resisting arrest, and carrying a highly sophisticated fake ID. Pulled him out of a stolen 150 grand Mercedes S-Class over on Elm and Maple." Brody finally looked up, weary eyes scanning Darius from head to toe. He took in the wet, expensive suit, the silver hair, and the unflinching, cold stare. Brody had processed thousands of car thieves in his career. The man standing in front of him didn't fit the profile. Not even slightly. "Fake ID, huh?" Brody said skeptically, extending a meaty hand. "Let's see it." Reynolds slapped Darius's wallet onto the desk. "Yeah, it scans, but look at him. Guy claims he lives in Oak Ridge Estates. Probably printed the card in a boiler room downtown." Officer Corey Bennett walked through the double doors a moment later, carrying the dripping black garment bag and the soaked judicial robe wadded up under his arm. He looked miserable, eyes darting nervously around the room. "Put the evidence on the counter, Corey," Reynolds commanded. He pointed a mocking finger at the wet black fabric. "Get a load of this, Sarge. Guy was carrying around a choir gown or a Halloween costume. Probably stole it out of the trunk of the Benz." Darius stood perfectly still in front of the desk. He looked directly up at the security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling, ensuring his face was clearly visible, then spoke in a booming, perfectly articulated voice that silenced the surrounding officers in the bullpen. "For the record, I am formally requesting that these handcuffs be loosened. They have been ratcheted to their maximum tightness without justification, cutting off my circulation, and I am beginning to experience numbness and severe nerve pain in both hands." Brody frowned, looking over the desk at Darius's wrists. The metal was indeed biting viciously into the flesh. The skin around the cuffs was swollen and discolored. "Loosen his cuffs, Mitch," Brody ordered softly. "There's no reason to have him strung up like a hog if he's cooperating." "He's not cooperating, Sarge. He threatened me on the side of the road," Reynolds protested, face flushing red. "He said I was making a mistake and that I was going to lose my badge. That's a direct threat to a police officer. I'm leaving them on until he's in the cage." Darius did not argue. He simply looked back up at the camera and gave a single slow nod to the lens. The documentation was complete. Reynolds had just admitted on the precinct's internal audio-visual recording system to using the handcuffs as a punitive measure for a perceived insult, a direct violation of department policy, and a clear-cut case of excessive force. Brody sighed, rubbing his temples. He didn't have the energy to fight with a hothead like Reynolds in the early morning hours. "Fine. Let's just get him in the system. Empty your pockets, John Doe." "My name is Darius Langston," Darius replied calmly, "as the identification card currently resting on your desk clearly states." "Yeah, we'll see about that," Brody muttered. He opened the wallet, pulled out the damp driver's license, and began typing the information into his terminal. Reynolds, meanwhile, strutted over to a nearby workstation and logged in to begin his arrest report. He typed furiously, eager to document his heroic takedown of a master car thief. He was already composing the narrative in his head. Suspect exhibited aggressive, furtive movements. Suspect aggressively resisted verbal commands. Suspect issued violent threats against my person. "Hey, Corey," Reynolds called out across the room, not taking his eyes off his screen. "Make sure you log that black dress into the property room as miscellaneous stolen garments." Bennett nodded weakly, pulling a plastic evidence bag from a dispenser. As he unfolded the wet black fabric to shove it into the bag, he paused. He held the robe up by the shoulders. It was heavy, pleated, with wide bell sleeves. It didn't look like a choir robe. It looked incredibly formal. Bennett swallowed hard, a terrible sinking feeling settling into the pit of his stomach. "All right, Langston, or whoever you are," Brody grunted, stepping out from behind the desk and motioning toward the live-scan fingerprint machine. "Step over here. Put your right thumb on the glass." Darius stepped forward. Despite the agonizing pain in his wrists, he managed to contort his hands to press his right thumb onto the illuminated green glass of the scanner. He did not say a word. He followed every instruction with mechanical precision. Right thumb, right index, left thumb, left index, 4 fingers flat. Brody watched the screen as the digital prints populated. The automated fingerprint identification system linked directly to the FBI's National Crime Information Center and the state's secure judicial and law enforcement databases. It was designed to catch aliases, outstanding warrants, and reveal the true identity of anyone processed. "System's running," Brody announced lazily, taking a sip from a styrofoam cup of cold coffee. Should take about 30 seconds. Then we'll see what kind of sheet you actually have, buddy." Reynolds chuckled from his workstation.
Bet you 20 it comes back to a rap sheet a mile long, Sarge. Grand theft, burglary, the works.
Darius simply stared at Brody. Brody glanced at the screen. The loading bar reached 100%. The system chimed softly. Brody blinked. He leaned closer to the monitor, brow furrowing deeply. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. The text on the screen glowed in bright, undeniable green font. AFIS/NC-IC, database match result. Name, Langston, Darius K. Criminal history, 0 results, clean record. Employment status, state government official. Clearance level, judicial tier 1, high security. Title, Superior Court Judge, 5th District. Alert, verified official. Do not detain without warrant. Brody's mouth opened, but no sound came out. All the blood instantly drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, chalky white. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He slowly looked up from the monitor at the tall, silver-haired black man standing in front of him, drenched, shivering, hands clamped in brutally tight metal cuffs behind his back. Then he looked past Darius toward the counter where Officer Bennett was attempting to stuff the wet black garment into an evidence bag. Brody's eyes locked onto the garment, the heavy pleats, the bell sleeves, a choir gown, a Halloween costume. Brody felt physically ill. It wasn't a costume. It was a judicial robe, a superior court judge's robe. "Sarge?" Bennett stammered, noticing the sheer horror radiating from Brody's face. "What is it? Did he pop for a warrant?" "Oh my God," Brody whispered, the sound barely escaping his lips. His hands started to shake violently. He had been on the force for 2 decades. He knew the names of the judges. He knew the name Langston. He had just never seen the man in person, let alone drenched in rain, without his suit jacket and tie on. "Mitch," Brody said, voice cracking. "Mitch, stop typing." Reynolds, oblivious to the nuclear bomb that had just detonated in the room, kept hammering away at his keyboard. "Just finishing the narrative, Sarge. I'm hitting him with the resisting charge, too. Guy's a menace."
"Mitchell, get your hands off that damn keyboard right now," Brody roared.
The sudden explosion of volume made every officer in the bullpen jump. Reynolds froze, hands hovering over the keys, blinking in confusion. "What? Sarge, what's the problem?" Brody didn't answer. He practically dove over the booking desk, fumbling frantically for his heavy ring of keys. He rushed toward Darius, hands shaking so badly he dropped the keys twice onto the linoleum floor. "Your Honor," Brody choked out, voice trembling with sheer panic as he scooped up the keys and grabbed Darius's arm. "Your Honor, sir, I am so sorry. I am so deeply, deeply sorry." Reynolds stood up from his desk, a mocking smile still plastered on his face. "Your Honor, Sarge, what kind of joke is this? Did the fake ID say he was the mayor or something?"
"Shut your mouth, Reynolds. Not another word."
Brody screamed over his shoulder as he desperately jammed the small key into the cuffs binding Darius's wrists. Click, click. The heavy metal cuffs fell away. Darius brought his arms forward slowly, wincing in visible pain as blood rushed back into his severely bruised and indented wrists. He rubbed them gently, face remaining entirely impassive. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply stood there, a towering pillar of silent, terrifying authority. "What is going on here?" The booming voice came from the staircase leading to the upper offices. Captain Leonard Hayes, the night shift commander, stood on the landing holding a mug of tea. Hayes was a sharp, meticulous man who ran a tight ship. He descended the stairs, eyes darting between Brody's panicked face, Reynolds's confusion, and the wet, bruised man standing in the center of the room. As Hayes got closer, his eyes widened. He stopped dead in his tracks and dropped his ceramic mug. It shattered on the floor, hot tea splashing everywhere. But Hayes didn't even flinch. Captain Hayes knew exactly who Darius K. Langston was. Just weeks earlier, he had sat in the witness box in Langston's courtroom, testifying in a high-profile homicide case. He knew the judge's face, his voice, and his fearsome reputation for zero tolerance when it came to police misconduct.
"Judge Langston,"
Captain Hayes breathed, voice hollow with disbelief. He looked at the bruised wrists. He looked at the puddles of water forming around Darius's expensive shoes. He looked at the judicial robe stuffed halfway into a plastic evidence bag. The entire precinct went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights and rain lashing against the barred windows. Officer Mitchell Reynolds' arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a look of profound, paralyzing confusion that slowly, agonizingly morphed into absolute terror. "Captain Hayes," Darius finally spoke. His voice was no longer the polite, restrained tone he had used on the side of the highway. It was the voice of the court, a voice that commanded absolute silence and obedience. "It is a profoundly disappointing evening." Hayes rushed forward, face pale. "Judge Langston, sir, I don't understand. What happened? Why were you brought in?" Darius slowly turned his head, his piercing gaze locking dead onto Officer Reynolds. Reynolds took a step back, physically shrinking under the weight of the judge's stare. "I was pulled over on my way home from the courthouse," Darius stated, enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision. "Officer Reynolds informed me that my vehicle was stolen, my state-issued identification was forged, and that my judicial robe—" He paused, pointing a steady, bruised finger at the wet fabric on the counter. "Was a stolen choir gown he referred to as a costume." Hayes whipped his head around to glare at Reynolds, eyes practically burning holes through the young officer. "Reynolds, tell me you didn't—" "Captain, he—" Reynolds stammered, tough guy facade completely shattered. "He was driving a Benz in Oak Ridge. He didn't look he didn't say he was a judge." "I was never given the opportunity to present my credentials beyond the legal requirement of my license and registration," Darius countered, logic a steel trap snapping shut, "which you immediately declared fraudulent. You physically assaulted me, pinned me against my own vehicle, placed me in restraints intended to cause physical pain, and mocked my profession, all while your body camera and dash camera were presumably recording every single violation of my civil rights." Darius turned his attention back to the captain. "Captain Hayes, I want a photographer down here immediately to document the lacerations and bruising on my wrists. I want the audio and video footage from Officer Reynolds' cruiser and body camera secured and placed into evidence, with a copy sent directly to the Internal Affairs Division and the District Attorney's Office." Darius took a step closer to Reynolds, who was now visibly shaking. "You told me I was making a grave mistake, Officer Reynolds," Darius said softly, the silence in the room amplifying his words. "You told me you were sick of hearing my voice. Well, I assure you, for the months of litigation, investigations, and your inevitable termination hearings ahead, my voice is going to be the only thing you hear." The silence in the 12th precinct was absolute, heavy, and suffocating, the kind of quiet that precedes a catastrophic structural collapse. Captain Leonard Hayes stood frozen for a fraction of a second before his training and self-preservation instincts violently kicked in. He knew with absolute certainty that his precinct was currently ground zero for a multi-million-dollar federal civil rights lawsuit, a Department of Justice probe, and a media firestorm that would scorch the earth. "Brody," Hayes barked, voice cracking like a whip. "Get the precinct photographer up here right now. I want macro lenses. I want color-accurate lighting. I want every single contusion, abrasion, and mark on Judge Langston's wrists documented from 5 different angles." Brody scrambled for his radio, hands still trembling. "Yes, Captain. Right away." "And Brody," Hayes continued, eyes never leaving Reynolds, "lock down the server. Isolate the dashcam footage from Cruiser 47 and the body camera data for both Officer Reynolds and Officer Bennett. Encrypt it, and give me the only administrative password. If a single frame of that video gets corrupted, accidentally deleted, or lost in the cloud, I will personally see to it that you are indicted for tampering with evidence." Reynolds' face was completely devoid of color. The arrogant, swaggering street cop who had brutalized a man in the rain just 20 minutes earlier had been replaced by a terrified child staring into the abyss of his own making. "Captain," Reynolds pleaded, taking a shaky step forward, hands raised in supplication. "Captain, please, let's just talk about this in your office. It was a dark road. It was raining heavily. The suspect, the judge, he was driving a vehicle that fit a profile in a high crime-adjacent area. It was a good faith mistake under stressful conditions. Qualified immunity covers." "Do not insult my intelligence by citing qualified immunity, officer," Darius Langston interrupted, voice dropping an octave, echoing with chilling, resonant authority. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. Qualified immunity protects government officials from civil liability only insofar as their conduct does not violate clearly established statutory or constitutional rights, of which a reasonable person would have known. A reasonable person knows that a valid state-issued identification card is not a forgery simply because you harbor deep-seated racialized assumptions about the wealth of the person handing it to you. Darius took a slow, deliberate step toward Reynolds, ignoring the sharp pain radiating up his forearms. "Furthermore," he continued, gaze pinning Reynolds to the floor, "a reasonable officer does not use handcuffs as an instrument of torture because his ego was bruised by a citizen lawfully questioning a detention. You did not make a good faith mistake. You engaged in a textbook deprivation of rights under color of law, in direct violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 242. You weaponized your badge." Captain Hayes stepped between the two men, not to protect Darius, but to isolate the radioactive liability Reynolds had become. "Officer Reynolds," Hayes ordered, tone stripped of any camaraderie, "hand over your service weapon now." Reynolds visibly flinched. "Captain, you can't strip me of my weapon before union representation." "I can, and I just did," Hayes roared, veins pulsing in his neck. "You are hereby relieved of duty, suspended without pay, pending a full internal affairs investigation. Disarm yourself immediately, or I will have you physically subdued and arrested for insubordination and resisting a lawful order from a commanding officer. Do not test me tonight, Mitchell." With shaking hands, Reynolds unclasped his duty belt. He pulled his heavy Glock from its holster, dropped the magazine, and cleared the chamber with a hollow clack before placing the weapon on the booking desk. He unclipped his badge and dropped it next to the gun. The metal shield landed with a dull, pathetic thud. Darius watched the disarming process with clinical detachment. He then turned his attention to the young rookie, Officer Corey Bennett, who was plastered against the far wall looking like he was about to vomit. "Officer Bennett," Darius called out softly. Bennett jumped, snapping to attention, tears brimming in his eyes. "Yes, Your Honor. Sir, I didn't—" "You stood by," Darius stated factually. "You recognize the discrepancy between the registration and your partner's aggressive narrative. You hesitated when he ordered you to inventory my judicial robe as a costume, but you failed to intervene. The law requires officers to intervene when they witness a fellow officer utilizing excessive force or violating constitutional rights." Bennett swallowed hard, a tear finally spilling over his eyelashes. "I know, sir. I was scared. He's my training officer." "I am not interested in what he said," Darius replied. "I am interested in what you are going to do now. When Internal Affairs pulls you into a windowless room tomorrow morning, you will be faced with a choice. You can hide behind the blue wall of silence. You can claim you didn't hear what he said. Or you can uphold the oath you swore when they pinned that badge to your chest. Your career hinges entirely on the exactness of your memory." "I'll tell them everything," Bennett blurted out, voice cracking. "I swear to God, Your Honor. I'll write the statement right now." He was out of line. He escalated the situation. "You were completely compliant." Reynolds whipped his head around, glaring at his partner with pure venom. "You little rat! You're going to turn on your own partner." "He's not your partner anymore, Mr. Reynolds," Captain Hayes interjected coldly. "He is a witness to a felony." The precinct photographer arrived, a young, nervous civilian employee hauling a heavy camera bag. Under Hayes' strict supervision, the photographer spent 15 minutes documenting Darius's injuries. The harsh flash of the camera illuminated the deep purple grooves etched into the judge's wrists, the abrasions on his neck where he had been shoved against the vehicle, and the mud splattered across his ruined suit. When the photography was complete, Captain Hayes awkwardly cleared his throat. "Judge Langston, I have already dispatched a tow truck to release your vehicle from the impound lot. It will be brought directly to the front doors of the precinct. I would be honored to personally drive you home." Darius calmly rolled down his wet sleeves, wincing slightly as the fabric brushed against his battered wrists. He looked at the captain, expression unreadable. "I appreciate the offer, Captain Hayes, but I will respectfully decline," Darius said. "I was brought to this facility in the back of a police cruiser as a criminal suspect. I will not leave in the passenger seat of one as a VIP. I have already contacted a private car service. They are waiting outside." Darius walked over to the booking counter. He reached out and picked up the damp plastic evidence bag containing his judicial robe. He held it carefully, cradling the symbol of his life's work. He turned back to the room one last time. Officer Reynolds was slumped in a hard plastic chair, face buried in his hands, completely broken. "The fundamental flaw in your policing, Mr. Reynolds," Darius said softly, the silence of the room carrying his voice to every corner, "is that you believe the badge granted you superiority over the citizens you were sworn to protect. You forgot that the law applies equally to the man in the handcuffs and the man holding the keys. You will have ample time to reflect on that distinction." Without another word, Honorable Darius K. Langston turned and walked out through the heavy double doors, stepping back into the freezing rain, holding his dignity and his ruined robe tightly against his chest. The fallout was not immediate. It was a slow, meticulously calculated demolition. Darius Langston did not call a press conference. He did not post angrily on social media. He was a creature of the law, and he utilized the justice system with the devastating precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. In the aftermath, a heavily redacted yet undeniable 45-page complaint was filed in federal court. The plaintiff was Darius K. Langston. The defendants were Mitchell Reynolds, the Oak Ridge Police Department, and the city municipality. The lawsuit did not ask for a monetary settlement. In a move that shocked legal analysts across the state, Darius explicitly waived his right to compensatory damages. He did not want taxpayer money. Instead, the lawsuit demanded sweeping mandatory court-ordered consent decrees. He demanded a complete overhaul of the department's use of force policies, mandatory third-party audits of all traffic stops for racial profiling, and the immediate permanent decertification of Mitchell Reynolds. The city attempted to keep the matter quiet, offering closed-door settlements and groveling apologies from the mayor. But the truth, much like water, always finds a crack to slip through. Soon after, the body camera and dashcam footage somehow leaked to a prominent investigative journalist. Whether it was a disgruntled clerk in the evidence room or a strategic anonymous drop, the source remained unknown, but the impact was nuclear. The video went viral within hours. Millions of people watched the unedited raw footage of a distinguished elderly black man calmly citing constitutional law being violently shoved against his own luxury car by a sneering, aggressive young cop. The world heard Reynolds mock the judicial robe, calling it a costume. They heard the violent click of the handcuffs being ratcheted too tight. The public outcry was deafening. Protests erupted outside the 12th precinct. The mayor, facing an unprecedented political crisis, immediately forced the chief of police into early retirement and publicly endorsed every single demand in Langston's federal lawsuit. Internal Affairs concluded their investigation in record time, aided immensely by Officer Corey Bennett's sworn, heavily detailed affidavit outlining Reynolds' pattern of aggressive, racially biased stops. Bennett, while reprimanded for failing to intervene sooner, was allowed to keep his job, placed under strict probationary mentorship. Mitchell Reynolds was not so lucky. He was formally terminated from the Oak Ridge Police Department, but losing his job was only the first domino to fall. Because of the overwhelming public pressure and the undeniable video evidence of excessive force and civil rights violations, the district attorney convened a grand jury. Reynolds was indicted on 3 felony counts: official oppression, aggravated assault, and deprivation of rights under color of law. The arrogant cop who had bragged about throwing a booster into a concrete cell was now facing up to 10 years in a federal penitentiary. On a crisp morning weeks later, the air in Oak Ridge Estates was bright and clear. a stark contrast to the midnight storm of the arrest. Darius Langston stepped out of his front door, dressed in a pristine, perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His wrists had healed, leaving only faint, fading yellow bruises. As he walked down his manicured driveway toward his freshly detailed Mercedes-Benz, he noticed a figure standing awkwardly by his mailbox. It was Edward Farnsworth, the retired surgeon neighbor who had driven past Darius during the arrest, pretending not to see him. Farnsworth looked pale, holding a small, expensive gift basket. "Darius?" Farnsworth stammered, stepping forward nervously. I just wanted to come by. I saw the news, the video. I am so incredibly sorry. I drove past that night. I didn't realize. I thought—" Darius stopped, looking at his neighbor with cold, penetrating eyes. "You thought exactly what the officer thought, Edward," Darius said, voice stripped of any warmth. "You saw a black man in handcuffs in our neighborhood, and your immediate assumption was not that your neighbor was in distress, but that the police had finally caught the criminal element you fear so much. You didn't stop because it was easier to believe the stereotype than to defend your neighbor." Farnsworth's face flushed crimson. "Darius, please. It wasn't like that. I panicked." "We are judged not by how we act in the light of day," Darius replied softly, "but by what we do in the dark when we think no one is watching." He walked past Farnsworth, ignoring the gift basket, and opened the door to his car. "Have a good morning, Edward." Darius drove himself to the courthouse, the commute peaceful and uneventful. He parked in his reserved spot and walked through the heavy marble columns of the judicial building. The security guards at the metal detectors stood a little straighter as he passed, murmuring deeply respectful greetings. The entire building knew what he had done. He hadn't just survived an abusive encounter. He had systematically dismantled the abuser and forced systemic change. He walked into his private chambers. Hanging on the heavy wooden valet stand in the corner of the room was his judicial robe. It had been professionally restored, dry cleaned, and pressed until the heavy black pleats were immaculate. Darius walked over to it. He reached out, fingertips tracing the thick, solemn fabric. It was not a costume. It was a heavy, burdensome mantle of responsibility. It represented the fragile promise of justice in a world that was too often unjust. He slipped his arms through the wide bell sleeves, pulling the robe over his shoulders. He zipped it up the front, the sound loud and definitive in the quiet room. He adjusted the collar, smoothing the fabric down his chest. His bailiff knocked lightly on the chamber door, peeking his head inside. "All rise, Your Honor." The bailiff smiled warmly. "The courtroom is packed. Are you ready for the morning docket?" Darius Langston looked at his reflection in the glass of his office window. He saw a man who had been tested by the very system he served. A man who had walked through the fire of prejudice and emerged unbroken. He saw a judge. "I am ready," Darius said, voice steady and powerful. He turned and walked through the private door leading to the bench, ready to deliver justice to a world that desperately needed it. The gavel was waiting. Did this story of justice served make your blood boil and cheer at the same time? Power unchecked is a danger to us all. But tonight the law fought back. If you love this dramatic twist of fate and want more intense, real-life-inspired stories of accountability, karma, and the fight for civil rights, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with your friends to spread the message that nobody is above the law. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss a thrilling update.